I know that we're only on episode 2 of the Bug Bounty series, but I think this may be one of my most favorite vulnerabilities that I'm going to make a Bug Bounty series on, not because the vulnerability, the bounty amount, or even the criticality of it, but mostly because of the industry that I've gone to hack into. So as you may have seen already in the preview or in the thumbnail of the video, I got to hack into some sort of a prison system where it was very, very fun. And we got to actually create a hub on Hacking Hub with Adam Langley on the specific one. But before we do that, I got to quickly give a shout out to our sponsors, Snyk, for making this video happen. If you've been following my channel, you know that I'm a big proponent of secure coding. Whether you are using open source libraries or writing your code from scratch, it is important to make sure your code that you're putting into your application isn't going to make you vulnerable to bad actors. That's where Snyk comes in. Snyk integrates into your existing tools, IDEs, CLI, and repos, and scans your code as you write it in real time. This way, you can make sure that your project remains secure from the start. Snyk finds your vulnerabilities and allows you to fix them with just a click. Snyk opens fixed PRs so you can just merge and move on. And in that last 30 seconds that I spent explaining what Snyk is, I scanned and fixed my code. And you can try it out for yourself for free by signing up today on snyk.co/nahamsec. Thank you, Snyk, for sponsoring. But now let's get into this video. As always, if you want to follow along, you can go to hackinghub.io, look for Prison Break, and go into the hub, push launch hub, launch this instance, and follow along. And if you don't want to follow and you want to just watch, kick back and watch me do my magic and hopefully learn something from it. Before we talk about the specific bug itself, let's talk about the program. The program came to us, gave us a wildcard scope. They gave us one asset that you needed access to with credentials, which was provided to us. And then the rest of them was self-registered, or there were admin functionalities that we have to break into and get access to each one. Those are really important to keep in mind. So we'll come back to it, but let's check it out. We go here. As you can see right here, it says app backend, which is one of the admin or the credential required assets, has these usernames and password. And the scope of the program, we're going to just use this for the scope of it. And we're just going to directly launch into it. And this is what we see. At first, it's just a registration. And as soon as you register, what it's going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to give it a inmate details. It's going to ask you for the last name and the prisoner number and the inmate number. And if you didn't have one, then you kind of get stuck here. And as always, you can just look at the JavaScript file and see if there's anything there. Not a whole lot in this case. I didn't get to find anything on here. So the next step was to actually go ahead and take a look at this app backend. So once we load up to app backend, we're going to use our credentials that were given to us by the program. We're going to log in. And before we jump into the backend discussion, I need you to understand that the hubs that we make around some of my findings for the bug bounty stories that I create on YouTube, they're just there to show you the process, my thought process, and the entire thing that I went through to find vulnerabilities, and they're not a 100% representative of the application. So we just created things to try and get it as close as we can by just condensing it in a small web app. So in this case, when I logged into the original application, it was similar to this. I just had a bunch of useless data and information that I didn't need. Honestly, this program was so old that so many people on that platform had access to it that they had put so many payloads in that the page was broken, and we had very limited functionality. So what I did here is I had to put it back together on my own and just go to the JavaScript file down here, open it up, and just go through it. So for this case, we are not going to look at the entire JavaScript file. We just condense it into a smaller JavaScript snippet that shows the functionality that I went after. And it kind of looks similar to this. It kind of had shortcuts where you could push a command in a letter. So for example, Command U would take you to the users on the admin side. If you did Command A, it would be the activity, Command S settings, and you get so on, you get it. So here we can see that there's two subdomains, one being the admin subdomain, and the second one being docs. And if you open these up and you went to them, let's go back here and open it. You can see that it says, hey, you need to log in. And if we did the same thing with admin, and let's just take one of these settings, and if we went to admin and typed it in, it would still ask us for a login. That meant that the session that I was given to on app backend did not transfer over on all these other apps. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, there was this API call. There was actually a bunch of API calls, but this one is the one that stood out to me and helped me get into what I needed. And let's just open it up and see where it goes. So as you can see now, by just going to that URL, what happened is it logs us in to the docs website. It no longer asks for username and password. It's showing us the documentation, the news. You can click on it, it'll open up some stuff. But what's really funny and interesting in this aspect is that it just puts a session token in the GET request. So it's not a post request. It's not setting a header. It is putting that in the actual request and the route that we're hitting after the web route with a parameter called session token, and it has this value. So if I were to copy this in another browser, like this one is an incognito, you can see at the top right. If I go here without giving it my username and password from app backend, I was able to log into docs. That of its own was a red flag because it made me curious about this JavaScript file. Can I do the same thing if I just go to admin and just give it that entire session URL? So if I do this, is that going to load? And the answer was no. It still asked me for a username and password. So I started just thinking, what if I need to have the route? So what if right here, instead of doing just a web route, I type in admin? What if I do users? And out of nowhere, when I did users, I saw it giving me a list of users that had limited functionality. And when I said limited functionality was, I could see the UUIDs, I could click into some of this information, but every time I clicked on it, I would have to put the session token into it. So for example, if I went to this one, it says it has 3 messages. If I click on it, it's going to ask me to log in again. But the trick here was to copy the link and then just put it right here with the session token and see what it does. And you can see it's showing me some data, but I'm not seeing any other information. Like I want to be able to see the email. I want to be able to see the password, for example, and maybe log in as this user. Maybe this is an admin user. Well, this is where you have to go back to the drawing board. Very similar to the last application, we also had access to the JavaScript file. So you always have access to it. And in this file right here is where I got a list of functionalities. Again, remember, this is not the entire file. This is just what we found interesting. But I had an entire list of URLs. So I had things like admin, settings, devices, messages, photos, whatever else that was accessible. I could access them, but those are just not really vulnerabilities that I wanted to go after. Don't get me wrong. I wrote those up. I reported them because there was some sort of privilege escalation by having this token. But what stood out to me was this user's reset password that I want to take a look at. So keep in mind, this is the first functionality that I discovered. We'll talk about this one later because I didn't come across this one until later on. So if we copy this entire thing and we go back to one of our sessions that we have and we send this request and intercept it with Burp Suite, we're going to be able to see where this is going to take us. So I'm going to go this, send it to repeater. We have to put our content header here, set our content type, and we're going to look at this JavaScript file one more time. It says that it requires an ID, which is the user ID, and a password. So right here, we're going to send this ID. We already luckily have this information. All we have to do is go back here and just grab any of them. In the case that I was hacking in this program that I was looking at, the user IDs were integers, not UUIDs. For this one, we made it a little bit harder for you to figure it out, but you can just copy the user ID in here and give it any password. I'm going to set the password to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it comes back and it says, let's see if I did something wrong. I want to make it a post request because that's what it says. It says password updated, but here is the problem. I know the password. I know the user ID. It's user ID 1, or in this case, it's UUID. But how do I log in? If I go to this admin site, it's going to ask you for a username and password, not a UUID. If I go to the app backend, it's the same thing. They're all going to ask me for a username and password, but we only have the UUID. So what is the solution here? Well, that's where I came across this other functionality. Let me find it really quickly right here that just allows you to impersonate. And all it takes for this impersonation is same thing. You're going to send a post request. And as we can see in the JavaScript file, it says, hey, all I'm expecting is an ID, which is the user ID. And we're going to send that out. And this one doesn't find it. So we don't have the right user ID. Let's go back to our list. Let's go to the admin site. We're going to copy this right here. And it comes back and gives us another session URL. It says, hey, if you want to log in and impersonate this user, all you have to do is go to this URL and we'll log you in. And so if we do this, let's do that one more time. I had to quote it. And bam, we're logged in. But we're logged in as this UUID, whatever UUID we pick. There's 10 of them. We can go through all of them. The problem is that I'm still asked for this information, but if you look at the top right, there is a messages and settings tab. So if you go to settings tab, this is where we're able to get a user's full user ID and an email that they're authenticated to in order to log in. So let me wrap this up really quickly before we move on to the next step of this. We have an account, we log in, we use that API to log into Docs, we use that same token against the admin side and authenticated us, and it elevated our access from whatever user access we had from app backend to admin. We use the password reset function to reset however many passwords we want, whatever users we want. We log in, impersonate them using the impersonate endpoint. We log into their account. And then what we have to do is go to their settings and grab their email, and the password is whatever we set it to. So in this case, for this user ID, the username and passwords are John, whatever at this entire URL. And the password is whatever I said in this last request. Right here, it was 123456. So now that we have all this information, let's quickly see if we can log in. And as we can see, this got us into the admin side. And now we can see more of what this side looks like. So if I go to admin/users, we are fully logged in and we can see everybody's information and so on. So this is a really good example of showing you how do you take an account, you escalate your privileges, find a way to authenticate in multiple applications, and just try and find vulnerabilities that could give you access to more data, that could open up more functionalities, or even access to more vulnerabilities or endpoints that could be vulnerable. There is one last step. As you can see here, we have the ability to create users, and it shows us all of the users that have been registered so far on this website. And if you remember correctly, if we go to the main website again, remember that we could register right here with whatever email we wanted to. So I'm going to just do @gmail.com and the password. I am going to intercept this request really quickly. We're going to send it over and we're going to intercept it. And what I'm going to do here is I want to show you what happens in the backend. Every time a new user is created, the admins are going to be able to see this on their end, and it shows them their email address and user ID. Now, this right here is an example of taking a vulnerability to the next level, because what I realized here is that if I could find a place to inject some sort of a data in here, in my case, when I was looking at this website, it allowed me to have first name, last names, password, and so on, but none of those were vulnerable. But what was interestingly vulnerable is the email field allowed me to inject HTML within it. So if I were to send this request and refresh it, you can see that it is allowing me to put HTML in here. And by allowing HTML, my thought process was, what if I can put an XSS in the email address field, and anytime an admin opens this page, it fires a blind cross-site scripting where I went from having to use a username and password to reset password, impersonate to get here. I just get a blind XSS. So I don't even have to rely on having credentials, and I can just completely escalate this vulnerability. So what we do right here is we go back and we can put anything like a script tag. We can put something like a U on mouse over equals alert, close it out, send it. And if we refresh, if I go over this, you can see that the alert popped up. So in my case, I used a script that grabbed a bunch of different information. I have my version of a blind cross-site scripting tracker thing. Drop me a comment, let me know if you want to make a video on it, but I have my own. It pretty much grabs their session, grabs a screenshot, sends it over to Discord. So in this case, I completely escalated my vulnerability, and it made it easier because I had access to the specific panel. I could see the data that's coming in. I could test out the different fields like name, last name, phone number, password. None of them were vulnerable except this one. So I wasn't just shooting scripts and payloads into this page and spamming it, hoping it's going to fire. I could see what the admins see, go back from the registration form, create the right payload, and get it to execute on in here and write it up as a blind cross-site scripting against admin. And the key to all of that was that I escalated myself from a regular user with seeing no functionality on their backend side to getting an admin with more functionality, and then using that to a blind cross-site scripting. All right, that's it. If you haven't already, do me a favor, drop a comment, let me know. Do you want to see more videos like this? Should I make this more of a regular series? And if you haven't already, become a Nahomi. We did pass 100,000 subscribers, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop. Our next stop is going to be 200,000. So it's not too late to become a Nahomi. hit that subscribe button. And you can also support the channel by becoming a member of the channel. It's, I think, $5 a month. It helps us support the channel and keep it running. All right, that's it. See you on the next video. Peace.